I have heard music, conversation, and articulate speech all on a ray of light. And I was like,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Hustle Up podcast, bringing you the dopest content on mindset, business, fitness, and relationships. Today, we're sitting down with Mr. David Joseph. And if you're just tuning in for the first time, go ahead and hit that subscribe, ring that bell. If you're not tuning in for the first time, go ahead and hit subscribe, ring that bell. My name is Clint.
I'm Jonathan. I'm Matt.
And guys, or David, for those who may not know who you are, can you give us a brief intro, background on what you do, and to give an even pre-story on that? When I walked in a few minutes ago, I walked in on one of the coolest definitely the coolest conversation I've heard in 2020. So expect cool things from this podcast.
absolutely, guys. Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's been a great time just hanging out with the whole Zeppelin team and the podcast team today, and getting ideas out and beginning to hash through kind of what's next for our company. So I'm David Joseph, and I'm the founder of a company called the Affirmations Agents. We are a technology development company, and we work in entertainment, energy, and also some aerospace context, if you will. And sort of the core goal or core mission of the company is to be able to develop next generation technologies that can cross over different industries, benefit our planet in a healthy way, help humanity and Earth to grow and step into what's next. Step into what do we do next, both in terms of problem solving. We got a number of problems, as everyone knows, to solve. Everything from energy to some of our aerospace endeavors are going to probably become very challenging for our technology as it is now. And also, I've always been in some sort of creative field, mainly the entertainment field, either music or film or photography. And so, that, of course, came pretty natural when I started the company about 2 years ago. I would say September 2017 is when I really decided to jump off the ship, and go full on. And I met with Matt and Joe from Zeppelin Agency not too long after that, maybe several months or 6 months or something after that, for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, sound right, Matt? Yeah.
Probably about, like 2 months,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say.
Yeah. And we hit it off. First of all, I was like blown away that their name was Zeppelin Agency. Growing up, like, Zeppelin was my favorite band, and they made me want to play music and play the guitar, and so to sort of give you the backstory here and how I arrived at launching and building the company. When I was 6, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in the movie theater, and I told my mom, "Let's see it again right now." So it was the first time, I guess, I was old enough to have the realization that, like, someone's job was to make this thing, and it just looked so much fun. I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" Someone actually gets to hang out and make these things all day long.
Yeah.
So I, right then, within, by the time I was 7 or 8, I was, writing really crappy scripts, ideas, and real, youthful kind of silly stuff. But I was writing consistently, and I would always come up with crazy little gimmicks that I thought would maybe work on camera, But, of course, this was at a time when DSLRs weren't everywhere, and so something like the idea of making a movie, you'd have to go get a film camera, all of these expensive items. And, this wasn't in our family budgeting. It was out of our budget,
And this isn't like YouTube's not around yet, so there's no user-generated content. You can't just sit at your computer and rack up millions of views.
Right. Of course, it was you would have to climb over the proverbial wall of the palace, which is Hollywood, if you wanted to do something like that.
Yeah.
And then I was about 13, maybe 14 years old. It was the last day of school, I believe, in the 6th grade. They called it field day. I don't know if anyone remembers.
Oh, of course.
Field day.
My most sought after day of elementary school.
Absolutely.
Totally. And so I was out on on field day, and there was these kind of older guys who had long hair, and they looked really cool, and they were playing Led Zeppelin 4 on their boombox, and I was like, what is this magic, coming out of this box, And I, then and there, I thought, now maybe I want to do this, I mean, of course, I still love movies and, always will. They're really the core of my creative mind is storytelling through pictures. But I convinced my grandpa. He was very, he was kind of, if it was a new hobby, he would be like, we're buying the cheapest of whatever this is, and just, to make sure you actually do this, Convinced him to buy me a guitar, and I kind of started getting guitar lessons and playing in, crappy little middle school bands. We were playing Zeppelin covers and Danzig and the Misfits and all this kind of stuff that was fun, So that was, that sort of led me into, by the time I was about 18 or 19, I had been playing in several bands, and, I had been introduced to the recording studio, and the recording studio seemed like a magical place to me.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so I had a buddy of mine, actually, and his name was Chris Brand. We went to school together, and he was a little older than me, and he had some recording gear. He had like an 8-track reel-to-reel, and he had some microphones and different audio gear. And his kind of like side gig was going around like local bands and recording them in their garage or whatever,
Not to age you, but was recording done on reels at this point? So a band would need to have a full song composition done before even recording.
Frequently, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure some bands would kind of wing it, but I'm 44 now.
Okay.
So this would have been, like late 80s or something like that, Yeah, most of it was reel to reel, and I think there were like some cassette recorders and stuff that were cheaper than reel to reels back then, But yeah, I remember watching him put the microphones around and, set up the recording session and run the mixing board he had brought with him, and I was like, what's all this stuff? This looks really cool, and it was, I was always a little like into technology. If I, and even still to this day, if I see a new piece of technology, I'm like, how does it work? What does it do? I want to know about it.
Yeah.
Which will play into like modern day here in a few minutes. So I started recording and, got a little bit of a budget together with our band, and we did a proper recording studio, and began making an album. And this kind of led, over the next about 8 or 9, 10 years. That was really like what my focus was making music, got into doing film soundtracks, things like that. I worked at this place. It's now called Atlanta Pro Audio, and I grew up in Atlanta. And then
I love that place.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I basically like begged them for a job in my early 20s, and they were like, nope, we don't really, they were a small company, and they're like, we don't really need anybody. So I would go like one day a week, rather, and work over there basically for free until they gave me a job.
Yeah.
Persistence, right? Going back to a little bit about the theme of your show, persistence really does pay off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So was that album what caveated you into being able to pursue music for the next decade?
Yeah, essentially, I still had like a day job for, several years, of course. And then I met this guy, he goes by the name Super Frank, right? New Yorker. At the time that I met him, he had just started managing James Brown, Godfather of Soul, James Brown. And this was the manager that kind of turned around Mr. Brown's career and, through the end of Mr. Brown's life. And that wasn't relevant until later, but he was managing James Brown, and he kind of saw something in me. He came by the studio on a mutual friend. We had a mutual friend who brought him by the studio, And here I was with 6 or 7 different musicians kind of directing and orchestrating. Now you play this and let's try this, and he just kind of saw something in me, the passion, So he agreed to finance a studio for me. And the studio that I was like, oh my God, I get to do this full time. And it was a dream come true. And it still was a great ride. So we found this studio space. And funny enough, this is before most of these cats were very successful. But we shared a studio space with CeeLo, Ben Allen, who produced that famous track, Maybe I'm Crazy.
Yeah.
And this guy.
Gnarls Barkley.
Yeah, Gnarls Barkley.
Barkley,
That's
yeah.
it. Yeah. So we shared this studio space with these guys, and we would all kind of share equipment, things like that. Hey, I need this microphone, or, can you play something on this track for me and stuff like that, And of course, we'd all kind of party together and have, a little rock and roll lifestyle, right? Mm-hmm. And that lasted, until my late 20s. And, I had, about my mid 20s, I had picked up a photography camera for a trip to Europe. Excuse me, for this trip to Europe. And I kind of really discovered that, I had a good eye, and I really, really liked it. You know what I mean? And this was kind of the bridge between my audio world and my visual world here, right? So I had a good friend who had actually been my girlfriend in high school and part of college, who had just moved to New York City, and she's like, hey, I've got this roommate that doesn't move in for several months. You're welcome to come up and hang out or something like that if you want a free place to stay in New York. And within a few days, I said, screw it, I'm just going to move to New York, right? And I'm gonna try my hand at something.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try my hand in the city that if it doesn't break you, you become successful. And so kind of going back to the theme of where I'm at now, it took a risk. It was a big risk, I didn't have a job yet. So, risk taking definitely, and the sort of entrepreneurial spirit of, let's try.
Jump in the deep end, learn how to swim.
Earlier you said you jumped off the ship in December of 2017, and even as far back as your early mid-20s, you're taking these risks.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. In the case of New York, the risk paid off in terms of my learning, and I ended up in 2005 there and was asked to go on the road with Mr. James Brown as a photographer. Through his manager that was, had bankrolled the studio and stuff, right? And then also to help out in the audio side of this company that was called Intrigue Music, or the Intrigue Group at the time. And, kind of run their little local studio they had in their office, with some of their music clients, and then also go out with Mr. Brown all over Europe for about 3 months, off and on.
So you got to get to know him pretty intimately?
I'm not sure that anyone got to know that guy really intimately, but I got to spend a lot of time with him. Sound checks were always one of my favorite things, because the guy was like 70 something at the time.
What do you
he
think
had this
made
ear
him?
That was incredible.
What do you think made him special? What was it about James Brown that no one else at the time could even match?
I think it was a combination of things. It was his ear for songwriting. Those beats just make people want to dance and move, and hence why they've been sampled so many times, right? Mm-hmm. And I think his stage presence, and certainly at a certain point, kind of like what's happened with the Rolling Stones, his songwriting, didn't get better than it had been at the height of his career, but he was able to ride out that career on the fact that he had all these hits, and it was, this huge influence on hip hop and on funk.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's be honest. The guy captivate audience. That's what he did. He got on stage and he made you watch him. You know what I mean? That wasn't a guy that was just up there singing. He put his heart and soul into the music. And I mean, David captured some iconic photos of Mr. Brown, and is really cool. Y'all should look at it sometime.
Are they up anywhere?
They're on my Facebook page, in fact, which is I believe it's Facebook.com/Agent David Joseph. I think that's what it is right now. I have to check. I changed the ending to match my current work life, But yeah, that was like going back to what Matt said. The guy was just somehow like magnetic, and he still had this incredible ear at that age, He could hear all these little details in the music. And around that time, I was, kind of looking to supplement my income, because I was working part-time at Intrigue. When we weren't on tour, I wasn't working that much, So at the urging of a friend, a job at National Public Radio, WNYC, New York, for a show called Studio 360. And when we fast forward a little bit to modern day, I've put a little bit of an homage to Studio 360 in one of our digital entertainment products. But Studio 360 was really sort of like a master class in storytelling. Like these are all these like hardened, seasoned, right, NPR producers who've been telling great stories for years, and the chance to go over there and learn from those folks was awesome. You know, I learned so much about how to tell a story that captivates audiences from that job. So yeah, to jump ahead a little bit more, because just to kind of lay the framework, you know, of what I'm doing now and what Imagination is all about. I ended up moving to San Francisco after about 8 months in Arizona. I met this girl. She lives in Arizona. I was getting kind of burned out on New York to a degree. You know, I loved it, but I was barely able to afford it, right? NPR salaries don't pay that much, if you're wondering. You know, it's public radio, but it was cool. It was a great experience. And so in San Francisco, I was always very into technology, right? And so in college, me and my buddies in the band I played in all got jobs at IBM repairing initially desktop computers and stuff, and they would train you, you know, so I didn't have to know that much about it when I first walked in the door. But repairing desktop computers, and that moved on to repairing parts of servers, and that moved on to, you know, building portions of server farms by hand and stuff, you know. And I hung with that job until, you know, I moved over to Atlanta Pro Audio. But it was a foundation that, you know, that I never knew would come back later, right, and be a big influence on me. And so, you know, to kind of jump forward to San Francisco, which was, I was in my mid-30s when I went to San Francisco after about 4 years in New York. I managed to nail down a job at the Academy of Art University in their film department, in the post-production labs, right? So there's a bunch of cool stuff. We had like 200 editing suites or seats, you know, in the building, which also had like special effects stuff and, you know, all kinds of like high-end Autodesk software, things like that. And we had like film scanners to scan 35 millimeter film. And so I had to learn a bunch of stuff I didn't know that much about yet, you know. And while in San Francisco, I pretty much kept that job because it's, you know, it didn't pay great, but it paid enough to have 3 roommates in San Francisco and survive to a degree, you know.
I heard it takes about 7 roommates now to survive.
Yeah, dude, I'm sure.
In a studio apartment.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, it is crazy expensive.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, it's unreal, really. So you know, I did that for several years, and I was offered. Well, sort of backing up for a minute, I went to middle school with Andre 3000 from Outkast, and we had been friends in school and kind of off and on continued our friendship. And I used to see him at Atlanta Pro Audio. You know, he'd come in there
all the time
looking for gear or some keyboards, some old vintage keys or old vintage drum machines, you know. And you know, we would try to track them down for him, you know, maybe on the internet if we didn't have it, you know. So Atlanta Pro Audio, if you're not familiar, is sort of Atlanta's like premier professional recording studio supplier, and they build Pro Tools rigs.
Well, not only that, they had the most vintage gear you would ever find. So like the original 808s and like all these keyboards that people awesome. And like Kanye makes all of his stuff on. Like they are the only ones that could get some of these keyboards. I used to be up there all the time, and I was the same way, just trying to find vintage gear to make sounds that no one else could, because this was before Reason. This was before all the other things. So you had to make your own sounds. So
it was all hardware.
We would get up there, and this is when MPC started being really big, you know, and MP is like sampling.
What is MPC?
MPC 3000, so, or 2000, or whatever one you had. You would sample your own sample into it, plug it into a pad, and just make your beats on the MPC. And so then that's when that was huge. And so we get all this vintage gear and then put the sounds in the MPC and make beats that way.
Like if you knew how to use the MPC pretty well, you always had a gig in a studio.
Yeah.
Like someone would be like, "Oh, if you can program MPC, you got a job," you know.
Oh yeah, Little John, he used to rock the MPC back in the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was you. Well, I do have another question in my head, so I don't know if you were reading my mind. But my question now is, I want to touch on storytelling, because that seems to be a pretty common theme of what you're touching on. You know, from, you know, I think you said your mission is to tell stories through pictures, or that's something that's really, you know, close to you. And then you talked about your time with the radio and learning from NPR storytellers. What is it about storytelling that's so important, and how do you properly do it?
Well, you know, storytelling, of course, can take all kinds of different forms, you know, and the art of filmmaking encompasses it in a way, almost all of them, right? When you really think about it, you've got to write a screenplay, right? and then you're filming things on camera with actors who are essentially acting out what was on paper, right? Of course, if you've ever watched a movie without the music, you realize it's not the movie, right? The music is such a huge part of it, So I think the fascination has always been storytelling in various forms, and it just kind of took on different incarnations throughout my life or career, and
what are the common like fundamental like principles of it that are applicable through music, through video, through selling your business?
Technology,
yeah, through technology. Exactly. Yeah.
Because that's like it's like if my passion on one side of the coin is storytelling, the passion on the other side of the coin is technology. Of course, and movies, of course, are laden with technologies. I mean, the average moviegoer doesn't realize, how much gear, right?
Yeah.
How much tech goes into making a movie, from computers and server farms for processing images and all this stuff. But I think, with storytelling for me, the root of it, of course, is a good theme, a good backbone. I've always been really into sci-fi movies, of course, Star Wars, Blade Runner as a kid, all that kind of stuff, and still am. Having compelling characters that you can either put on screen or perhaps they're on paper, and depending on the format. Compelling characters inside of a really solid theme. And in my experience, if you set up these elements nicely, the story almost can write itself to a degree, even though you're doing the work, right? And I think Matt's had some experiences with this too, where, setting up a great scenario with theme and character and settings you put these characters into and scenarios you put the characters into, kind of lets the story writing process take life, come to life in a unique way. And sometimes you end up in a different path than you thought when you started the story, right? But that might make it better, per se. And I think right now, one thing that I've really, in the last couple of years as we built the Imagination Agents, really become tapped into is that mobile culture, things like social media, of course, most people look at this on their phones now, right? Instagram, blogs, podcasting like what we're doing, YouTube, they're becoming part of a bigger story, right? Applications even, right? They're becoming part of a bigger story in people's daily lives. And, and that, that really struck me a couple of years ago that, hey, these things are becoming not so passive. They're becoming more of an active sidecar, if you will, right, to our very lives and our daily lives and things like that, And I know Matt's worked in the creative field also and done app development and all that sort of stuff. And
right, music, app development, movies. But so what's one of your favorite directors? Like I know it really captivated me when I saw Robert Zemeckis make Back to the Future, and I was just like, "What? This is crazy." You know what I mean? It's one of those moments where you're like, "This is what I want to do. I want to do this. I love this so much." Steven Spielberg, Don Johnson,
right?
Just all the greats. So who was your?
Well, I think initially, and this is still very much rings true. I think Spielberg was a huge influence on me. I grew up watching his movies, whether he produced on them or directed on them. And I think he produced on Back to the Future, was one of the main producers on that. And so Spielberg, absolutely. Stanley Kubrick, I would say Stanley Kubrick cast a shadow over my creative world. He's certainly much darker than Spielberg, but I love that, right? In fact, when Full Metal Jacket came out in the theater, I think I was like 15 or something, and this is back when, they really wouldn't let you into movies unless, it was an R-rated movie,
Yeah.
And I convinced my mother. We were on vacation in Florida at the beach, and the closest place it was playing Full Metal Jacket was like 60 miles or something, right? I talked her into driving to the movie theater and, getting me into Full Metal Jacket. And, I loved Kubrick when I got a bit older. I loved Terrence Malick. He's a little more artsy, a little more visual in his storytelling than some of these other directors. But yeah, I mean, Kubrick, Spielberg, Terrence Malick, all these cats were a big influence on me. Like right now, I'm into quite a few different shows and movies that I've seen recently that I thought were really strong. But I think there's a new era of filmmakers coming too. That I think the new generation of filmmakers and visual/audio storytellers, I believe, will encompass more than just the movie screen. I believe you'll start seeing story that's tied to apps, right? Story that's tied to a bigger, broader canvas. Because again, with faster internet speeds, multi-gigabit data connections, we're going to be in a world where storytellers have new tools.
Yeah,
absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like an example that pops into my head is live interactive technology. Right. So being able to do sports betting over live, or it's for everyone listening. When I say that, think of commenting on an Instagram live or commenting on an FB live, Facebook live. For the first time in history ever, there's two-way communication over live video, and so the doors that's going to be opening is just one of the new ways. And then you have like AR and VR and like all those different kinds of storytelling devices, and it's cool to watch that progression, because you have TV where everyone would center around, and then you got TiVo where now you could record the live TV and watch it in other places of your house. And now, like you were talking about, there's the mobile, and now you can watch from anywhere. You don't have to be in your house.
Absolutely. It goes with you.
Exactly. It goes with you. And with each evolution, I agree wholeheartedly, the storytelling becomes a whole different ballgame. Right. So what are some of your projections of what are going to be the new ways of storytelling moving into the future?
Well, our company, Imagination Agents, and along with some partners, and we're still developing great partnerships. Some of the folks here in this room are on our partner network. We have a platform called Story 360, which is again a little bit of an homage to Studio 360 when I worked there in New York. And Story 360 on the original storytelling side allows the storyteller, if you will, to tap into everything from podcasts to short videos on YouTube to blog posts, and then using their social media accounts to build and develop story separate from the highly expensive version of the way Hollywood's done it for a long time. And in the Hollywood system, it can sometimes take several $1 million just to figure out if this $50 million movie is even going to work, right?
Right.
That's crazy. That's a cost prohibitive thing for most folks, right? And also, again, I like to think of it as the democratization of storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Like YouTube and Vimeo. Vimeo is a great platform that I love,
Yeah.
Did I hear you correctly in that Story 360 is more so for storytellers than maybe story listeners or consumers?
It's for both. Initially, it was aimed. I initially designed it around original content that I wanted to make. That I thought, I want a bigger canvas, right? Because kind of just like Matt here, I had worked in music and audio and radio, and so I knew the power of and the practical ability to use these multi-format platforms. But Story 360 will also be what I call a storytelling hyperstack, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say, for instance, if you're into a certain TV show, you could go in there, type in the name of the TV show or the movie, etc., and Story 360 would return back to the audience an incredible wealth of specifically curated resources around that story, whether it's social feeds or it's really cool, interesting news, things of that sort. So I'm hoping that as Story 360 develops, we'll get it into the marketplace, and the audience side, the consumer audience side, will get to have a different experience as well, because you're sort of tapping, you're sort of hyperstacking multiple formats and multiple channels together. But again, I think also it'll be a powerful tool for the actual creator, being able to look at story from different angles.
Yeah, and with VR and everything else setting into play now, and you being in that atmosphere and kind of having a 360 view of everything, I feel like everything is going to change. You remember those books that we used to read when we were a kid? And it'd be like, if you want this adventure, turn to page 35, or if you want to go right, turn to page 60. I think that's how movies are going to start.
Like that Black Mirror movie.
Yeah, a lot
like
more
Bandersnatch
interactive.
Yeah, Bandersnatch. Yeah.
Well, in fact, I read an article just recently that Netflix is putting $1 billion into interactive story. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely coming. Exactly how developed it gets in the short term, who knows? But the fact that you're seeing major players like Netflix put in, that kind of money tells you that it's gonna happen.
Yeah,
I mean, look at
absolutely.
Xbox, look at PlayStation, look how far
Right.
that's come. Like third-person shooter games and stuff. I mean, sometimes I really feel like I'm in the game. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And now they have pads that you can walk on, where you feel like you're walking around. So it's starting to get really real. What's that? That movie that just came out that talks
Ready
about
Player One?
Ready Player One. Yeah,
Yeah.
I felt like
Right,
kind
right.
of
Speaking
that
of
glimpse
Spielberg.
is gonna be
Yeah.
like that. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, absolutely, and I think Matt's spot on that. Like, what's happening is that we're the public is getting all kinds of different ways of experiencing story, and I think gaming, to a degree, not necessarily all the time, but I do think gaming and the quote traditional movie will merge closer together
Right.
in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you see esports just growing and growing enough as is. That's actually an interesting thought, is converging the idea of a big post-production, type of movie with the esports interaction. Like, that's
Right.
going to really, you could be your favorite character in the movie and make the decisions, and there'd be, reciprocal things that happen based upon the decisions you make. And that's going to be a really interesting way of doing storytelling. And the reason, it's like, imagine a movie being like Grand Theft Auto, and you could really just walk around and do whatever you want. Like, that's really a crazy
Right.
concept.
Well, part of the fun of Grand Theft Auto is that you get to forget about whatever's going on during your day, and you get to break the law.
Yeah.
You get to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And drawing that back to storytelling, the mark of a great storyteller is drawing the audience out of their shell by creating a world in which they can forget about the fight that they got in with their spouse, the fight they got in with their boss,
Right.
whatever it is on their mind that's distracting, and it becomes this alternate world that they get sucked into. I'm curious, the tie back to entrepreneurship is infinite, whether you're seeking an investment
Yep.
and you want to lead the investors down an emotional journey and hit them with surprise.
That's definitely storytelling.
Storytelling.
Yeah. Steve
it's
Jobs.
Storytelling back to your customers. Here's our brand. Here's who we are.
Yeah.
Bring them into the journey. You're enrolling others in your vision. I want to know, it sounds like you experienced a lot of growth in storytelling from your time at NPR. Were there any, and maybe not just one, but were there any singular moments that drew you into that growth and you really said, hey, I'm getting good at this?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's a good question. So, Studio 360, if the audience isn't familiar, definitely look them up online. They have great material. Is an arts and culture show, and we had a host, and much like what we're doing right here, we would have guests come on the show and sit down with our host. His name was Kurt, and they would engage in this conversation, right? So sometimes this conversation would go for 30 minutes. Other times it would go on for 2 hours. And my job as the producer or one of the producers on the show was to take those 2 hours or what have you and make it into 20 minutes that were really good and the audience wanted to hear.
Right.
Of course, some of these shows, when you tap into them on NPR or something, sound like they're live, but they're not. They're highly edited by skilled editors and producers and such. And I would say some of the big turning points, well, I come to work one day and I didn't always know who the guest would be, and sometimes things would get shuffled on the schedule, and so you never know who's going to come by. I walk into work one day, a few minutes later, Woody Allen walks to the door, and I'm like, what? Here's this, this iconic filmmaker and actor as well. And so, so editing his interview was really great. It was one of the first ones I did. I was really nervous.
It's like a surreal moment.
Yeah, it was.
I remember
wild.
when I did Flight and I got on Flight and I got to meet Robert Zemeckis in person. I was just like, whoa,
Awesome.
this is crazy. And everyone's calling him Bob, and we sit down and eat lunch together and actually spend some time together. And it was so surreal, like getting to know this person, and like, because it's someone I looked after like my whole life. I looked up to this person. You know what I mean? Just from a storytelling standpoint, and just the awesome movies this man created, and being able to sit there and watch him work really inspired me,
And I think that those kind of experiences are liberating for creative folks because, you realize they go through the same challenges, whether they're making a flight or they're making a more independent, production.
Right.
The same challenges are there on a different scale, and you kind of realize that, hey, I'm learning how to overcome all these challenges and tell my story.
Well, and then you see it in a totally different light. You're like, oh, that's how they do this trick. Or like Denzel Washington walks up and you're like, oh, that's how he does this take scenes. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And
It seems so magical on
Yeah.
camera, but it's really just ass busting hard practical work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we were on set for hours and hours and hours, and just a lot of it was just waiting around. And a lot of times I shot Denzel Washington. What you thought was Denzel Washington wasn't Denzel Washington. It was just a stand-in shooting over the back shoulder.
Sure.
And there's all these creative things that
He's
you
in the
pick
trailer.
up on. Yeah, he's in the trailer just chilling. And there's all these creative things. You're like, oh, that's how they get the budget down. They don't use them as much as you think they do, And it's just a whole bunch of cool stuff being on set and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, and I think for me, riffing off what you're saying, when I started working on not just my own productions, but over the years I've gotten jobs on, like Matt has here, on several major productions, whether it was mostly in the camera department, because that's what I know the best, right? And that's what I'm trained on the best. But I did do some sound work in New York, like boom mic operating. I don't recommend it. If you value your arms, I don't recommend it. It's very painful.
It's hard work. It's way harder than people think.
Yeah, it really is. But there's something that I just, it always was inspiring to me personally, and kind of like gave me a push forward with my career, with my outlook to be a creative entrepreneur, to work on these big movies. And just like Matt said, you learn these tricks and you learn these cool things that you never imagined this is how they did this. And you're like, oh man, that's so cool that, when it's played back, it looks so magical.
Yeah. I want to pull this conversation from a Steve Jobs to a Steve Woz kind of conversation. And just like you were saying how on one side of the coin is storytelling, on the other side of the coin is technology. Now, I can't remember all the producers and directors' name, but you said Steven Spielberg. So if Steven Spielberg is one of your favorite storytellers, who's one of your favorite inventors?
That's a great question, and I have a little story to go along with it.
I can answer this.
Yeah, Matt knows it. I've been texting him about it all week as we've been setting up for the show. I would absolutely say by a long shot one of my very favorite inventors is Alexander Graham Bell.
Okay.
Graham Bell did some amazing things that many people don't even know about. This guy literally invented hundreds of things over the years.
What are some of those, just for the audience?
Sure. And of course, most people know that as the inventor of the telephone, and of course that's true. And he also, of course, the gramophone, which became the vinyl record player, has his name right there on it. But he invented something in the late 1880s that blew my mind, and I just found out about it a couple of years ago, as I began doing research on some of the renewable energy technologies that we're looking to build and looking to build partnerships to create. And it's called the Photophone, right?
Photophone?
The Photophone, right? Okay. And this is gonna blow your mind. It's gonna blow most people's minds. And when I saw this, I was like, "What?" I had to actually go look it up in the U.S. Patents Office and look at the schematics and be like, "How does this thing happen?" So the Photophone was the first wireless communications device in the world. Again, this is the late 1880s, and he had a laboratory just outside of Boston, which eventually became Bell Laboratories. And the Photophone used mirrors, transmitters and receivers, just like a regular phone, right? And what it tapped the sunlight for both audio transmission, and it was powered by the sun at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing.
I'm like,
yeah,
what?
When you say that, you're kind of like, huh?
I'm like, we're talking about 1880?
We're talking about 1880s, right. And he was able to, at one point during the evolution of the Photophone, he was able to transmit sound, I believe, about 800 meters, which is pretty staggering to think about. Using mirrors and light, here's this guy making a wireless phone call, right, in 1880 on the sunlight. I mean, it's pretty staggering. And of course, he had discovered at that point that the sun also will make energy, right? And I'm not sure that they called them photons yet, but that's what he was dealing with, right? And so the Photophone, I think, is one of the coolest inventions out there. Of course.
How come we haven't heard about it?
Well, I have several theories on that. One of them is that, back in that day, the biggest argument against the Photophone, Graham Bell considered that his absolute greatest accomplishment in his whole career, over the phone, over the record player.
No shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, I think he went to his deathbed in many ways very disappointed that he was not able to mass scale it. One of the arguments at that time about using the Photophone was that they didn't understand like cloudy days, because it used a ray of light, In fact, his wife has this great quote. She said to her father, she said, I have heard music, conversation, and articulate speech all on a ray of light. And I was like,
Wow.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's
I'm like, yeah.
It like gives you chills almost to think about it. You're like, holy hell, guys.
Yeah,
Like,
you say that in the medieval times, you get hung for witchcraft.
yeah, exactly. But again, like, so there were challenges technologically with how would you, without direct sunlight bouncing kind of like a laser, how would you make it work, right? Of course, we could have figured that out, right?
Yeah.
We could have figured it out, and my other theory, which is a little more sinister, is, you had Thomas Edison, you had, major companies that were financing Graham Bell, like J.P. Morgan Chase, these organizations. And, at this point, America was full steam ahead into wiring our nation, right? Wiring it with electrical wires. And now the telephone requires electricity.
Right.
So Edison was happy, right? So you had some of these like, powerful players in the mix that probably were not thrilled that this was basically free energy, right? And that the general public really could like have access to this, and and essentially like it probably disrupted the plans they already had, and so they were essentially probably helped kill it in some way, but.
Yeah.
Again, we could have overcome the challenge of the cloudy day had we wanted to. There was already so many other things we had overcome, And then a little bit later, actually about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine shows up at my house, and she says, I was in my library, and this book literally just fell off the shelf onto the floor.
Wow.
And she was about to come and visit me, right? And she brings this book over called The Technology of the Gods. And it's fascinating. It goes into all of these concepts and theories that some of this ancient technology in, like, let's say Egypt, for example, that's where they kind of focus their story, right? Some of this ancient technology in places like Egypt actually were designed to use the sunlight in some kind of energy source as well, like so early solar technologies and communications technologies.
No, we had a guy named Charlie Rocket on the podcast, and that was one of the things he talked about was that the pyramids weren't a tomb for kings. It was a factory of energy. Mm-hmm. And you see this as being a common theme, what I want to know, and I don't know if you know, but, other than talking to aliens or extraterrestrials, which could be a hypothetical conversation, what was it that Nikola Tesla and Bell and Leonardo da Vinci, what was it that they tapped into to be able to see the world the way they did?
That's a great question. And also to go back to favorite inventors, Tesla is absolutely near the top of my list.
He's got to be in the conversation.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing him in. Hey, what's up, Nikola, wherever you are?
Shout out Nikola Tesla.
Who knows? Maybe he's listening. Well, yeah, man, I think that different people see the world in different ways. I think that some people look at what might look like an ordinary situation to many folks, and some unique people see something totally different. I think that's could be one thing, right? Mm-hmm. Could they be talking to aliens? It's totally possible. I mean, hey, the world, the universe is a big place. It's possible. And then I think that like we talked about this earlier in our meeting. There's this thing, I just call them downloads, but it's like sometimes, you're looking at a problem, that you're looking for a solution to, and maybe that was, with Graham Bell and his telephone, or Tesla and his energy generating towers that he built and stuff to do, wireless global energy transmission, which is stunning and amazing. And it's almost like suddenly in a flash, you get all this information in your brain, right? Where that comes from, I'm not 100% sure, of course, but
Yeah, and they talk about, being able, like I've read a lot on Nikola Tesla. He talks about really being able to tap into the subconscious mind. And there's stuff going above us right now, and to be able just to tap into it and plug yourself into the ether, you know what I mean, the atmosphere, and
Look at
really
all-
pick
Yeah.
some stuff out and really drag it back down into your brain and get it in your subconscious. I think they were able to tap into that subconscious and that energy flow. I think they really understood it.
Well, look at all three of these guys. So you've got Tesla, you've got Bell, you've got Da Vinci, and there are more. As a business person, as a business, you've got two problems to solve. You got to find a problem to solve, and then you have to figure out how to make a profit. With Tesla and with Bell in particular, I don't know about Da Vinci. They're pure science. They're finding the most efficient solution to a problem, and they keep doing it over and over and over again. But finding out how to make it profitable or finding out how to scale it to the masses could be at odds with their invention. They're finding the most efficient cure to the problem.
Their focus is on the science.
Solution.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that the whole challenge of it is finding the problem, and that's where the real entrepreneur is. That's what the entrepreneur is finding the problem. It's not building something you think people will like and throwing it out into the ether or into the market. It's, this is an identifiable hole in the market, or this is a problem that a majority of people have and that you could solve. And I absolutely agree with that. I got another question. What are some, and this is actually an open question for anyone at the table, what do you guys think are some pragmatic steps that you could take to make that antenna its strongest to be able to download that kind of information?
Good question. I know for me, I got much more in tune with that when I began doing regular meditation practice.
Yes, sir. Let's go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm all about that,
Yeah,
bro.
and I got so into it and what was happening to my brain that I actually I've always been interested in Buddhism. I actually became a Zen Buddhist and took Buddhist vows and everything.
Did you go over to Nepal or did you go somewhere to do it, or?
Atlanta Soto Zen Center, actually.
Okay.
I have a sensei that's there. He's great. He's an artist. He's a really interesting character.
Oh,
you know?
wow, yeah.
But I don't meditate as much as I did for a while. I've been kind of busy, and then I'll get home and I'm tired or whatever. But also when I just take a walk, man, like when I just take a nice little walk and I just kind of let myself sort of tap out a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like when you're staring at the problem for hours and hours and hours, you don't always get the solution, but when you step away. So,
Yeah.
So
Matt may have some thoughts.
I definitely do have some thoughts on this. My best ideas come really late at night, usually right before I'm about to go into sleep. And I've seen tons of musicians. Michael Jackson used to talk about this all the time, how he would make the best songs right before he was able to fall asleep. And that's why I think musicians write some of their best songs really late at night. And it's just something about your subconscious and I don't know, everyone else is asleep, right? And you're just tapping in because everything's shut down and you're just tapping into the atmosphere.
No distractions
No
in a way.
distractions.
And
Yeah.
You're
less
clearing your
electricity and
mind.
everywhere.
Yeah, and like you said, just clearing your mind, going on a walk or just clearing everything out and just not having thoughts in your mind and just letting things come to you.
I agree with that. I actually I've heard that when you first wake up and when you're most tired, I have affirmations I say every day, and I do them first thing when I wake up and last thing I go to sleep, because that's when my brain is in theta waves. And you might know a little bit about this too.
Sure.
When your brain is in theta, essentially my understanding of it is that's when the biggest portal between your conscious and subconscious is there, meaning you have the best retention and recallability of information. And so that's why, when Michael Jackson's super tired, he can just tap into that creativity just like that.
Right. No, and I've noticed the same thing. I'm a bit of a night owl as well, and I'll get these ideas out at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm like, I got to take a walk or something and get this down on my phone or on paper, whatever. But I also think, and this is interesting, I did an interview with the CEO of Cisco Systems. Of course, Cisco Systems in the Department of Defense essentially built the internet as we understand it. And here's this guy in a $1,500 suit, who's the CEO of one of the world's most powerful technology companies. And somewhere in our conversation of the interview, he starts talking about how the universe is probably connected by some intergalactic substructure of information, and and that the information is flowing all around us if we know how to tap into it. And You know, it was really cool to see, you know, to see this guy that
This is the CEO of Cisco?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. It was cool to see, you know, and the conversation kept going and got more and more interesting. But, you know, we often think of some of these big tech CEOs or the heads of these corporations as not being open to things like that. But he was like totally down with it. He was like, "Oh yeah, man, the whole universe is connected." Blah, 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 you know, he's like, everything has an IP address. You just have to know how to find it. You know, I was like, wow,
Well,
this is cool.
And it's like that thing I shared the other day. You don't meet anybody by chance. You
Right.
know, it's
Right.
all for a reason or a purpose. And I believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I really feel like nothing's for chance. Like I met him. We were trying to take down Tyler Perry's studio. You
Right.
know, and that's how I met David. Is we were trying to buy Tyler Perry's studio when he moved, and our investor fell short. And we were very close to it, but he fell short. But that's why I met him, and we've been friends ever since.
It was a catalyst for where we are now. Right?
Yeah.
You know, in that sense, it's like, you know, did that situation work out? And it's like, no, but then, you know, now we're moving into a whole new phase, and had that not happened, then who knows, right? So, you know,
Do you believe that we have free will or just an illusion of free will?
That's a good question. I believe that we are experiencing some kind of illusion, and you know, what does that mean? Not totally sure. You know, could the universe be a hologram? Could we be living in a simulation like Elon Musk seems to think? Totally possible.
Yeah.
You know, I can't say with certainty, of course, but and then I think we also have choice and free will, right? You know, I think that there's kind of an interplay of these two things.
Kind of like
you
an
know?
infinity.
Yeah, like an infinity loop, right? It's an interplay of those things in a way. So, yeah, certainly to a degree we have, or at least what certainly perceives to be free will.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure if it
Truly
looks like
is,
that,
yeah.
or if it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. If you're starting a company and you needed two co-founders, you could pick from Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Steve Jobs, which two are you going to go with and why?
Elon Musk and Steve Jobs.
No, that's what's up.
Well, you know, I think Jobs, well, you know, going back to kind of duos, right?
Yeah.
Jobs and Wozniak, right? Jobs was very creative, and he was, you know, he knew how to sell anything to anybody just about, right?
Yeah.
And how to make it look sexy in the process, right?
Yeah.
And Wozniak was, you know, was this dedicated technology genius, right? But yeah, so for the situation with Jobs, I would pick Jobs because I've always been a fan of the products Apple's produced.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've got all types of computers, but I've always been a fan of, always felt the most at home on a Mac, right? And, you know, I've often talked about my computers over the years as collaborators, not as a passive piece of machinery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it makes me very comfortable with the idea of AI, but you know, of course, there will be negative things to AI, but
Don't be mean to your computers.
right, or you know, or at the very least, like I've thought about it, like you know, if I'm using Photoshop or Pro Tools or Avid Media Composer or something, I've often thought about it. Well, I'm collaborating with the brain of all these people
Right.
behind the scenes that made this software, you know, and together, along with this piece of machinery, which I've often referred to as a collaborator, you know, we are making art. And so, you know, of course, like I mentioned earlier, like my first few recordings were done on reel-to-reel tape machines, but once computers became able to do things like digital audio correctly, digital video editing and stuff like that, like I was just, you know, couldn't get enough computers.
Like
in
you
the
were
room.
saying, democratization of storytelling.
Well, not only
Yeah.
that, if you made a mistake on reel to reel, you had to do the whole thing over.
Yeah.
Just like anything on tape. Remember when we used to tape stuff? You know, you used to tape something. You make a mistake, you have to do it all over. It's
Right.
not like and then they got to where you could splice the reel to reel. And
Right.
the same with 35 millimeter. I used to work at a film place, old movie theater, and we ran platters, and it'd run through the camera and down, and I remember the whole platter would fall off sometime. We'd have to go through and splice out all the bent copies
Sheesh.
and put
I
them
don't
back
think
together.
I was around yet.
And put them back together. So it was
Golly.
really interesting to see that and to work in that environment as well.
Absolutely, the technology, or as technology's advanced, of course, you know, now you've got 100 bazillion filmmakers on YouTube, and you know, probably 80% of them are using these devices we're holding in our hands. You know, and you know, do phones look like an Ari Alexa or a Red Epic or something? Not right now.
Yeah,
but
soon they will.
Right. Yeah. Like, you
and
know,
everybody
but,
will be filming, just like music.
Totally.
Like back in the day, you had to go to a huge studio, pay tons of money if you wanted to do your record. Now everybody has a studio in their bedroom or their house or right in the middle of
You could
their
have a
living
studio on
room.
your phone.
Yeah, you can have a studio
yeah.
on your phone. I mean, people made hits just right off their phone. GarageBand.
Yeah, Charlie Rocky was talking about he made with a top 10 hit in the nation, all the way turned up with an Atlanta rap group called Travis Porter. He made it on GarageBand in his basement.
Yeah.
And it went top 10. It's democratization of storytelling. Like
Right.
it's really crazy. And
Because it's about the story. It's not the story. Like the listener or the viewer and the audience doesn't really care how you made it necessarily. I mean, we might care how
It's
we
the
make
end
it.
goal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we might care.
But I feel like you could make them care through proper storytelling. Like if I were making an album and I put the album out, and you know that's the part that people care about, but I could also have a vlog series that I put out in tandem to promote the album of me making the album.
Absolutely. This goes back to things like Story 360 that, you know, the platform we've been
Right.
developing. You know, you're able to kind of follow the story through the whole process, and it makes it interesting for people, you know. But I think I don't know if it was Spielberg or it was I think this was a photographer that and there's the old joke, what's the best camera? The one you're holding. You know. So
Oh, well, yeah.
you know, whichever one you're holding
Yeah.
right now, like, you know, going back to the fact that it's, you know, the core of what makes art good or whatever is it's right here.
It's
right
like
here.
that Diplo commercial.
Yeah,
It's a-
what you do with sounds. So the sounds.com Diplo commercial, we'll put a link up in the video. He goes through all the different ways he feels like he's cheating by making music. And then at the very end, he simplifies it and says it's not about the sample, it's not about the sounds, it's about how you use them.
Yeah.
It's about what you do with them.
It's really funny because he starts with like a sample, and then he's like, people say sample was cheating, so I went out and bought my own drums. People said that was cheating, so I went out.
He carved my own drumsticks.
Yeah, I
from a
grew some
tree.
trees, and then I'd cut the trees down and carve my own drumsticks, and then it was like a cut off, and it's like it's not about what you use, it's about how you use it.
Absolutely. You know, I always used to make a joke. I was like, you know, if I have to, give me a couple rocks and some sticks, I'll show you a story. You know. But yeah, I mean, what's happening with the technology landscape is opening up opportunities that folks like Steve Spielberg, you know, would have only dreamed of when they started making movies. You know.
Yeah.
And what's kind of cool is, you know, some of these filmmakers that have been doing this for many years are down to embrace that technology. And
I mean, I've seen some pretty incredible films shot on the iPhone. You know what I mean? People are making full featured films on the iPhone now. It's just it's crazy.
I saw that snowball thing. Did you see it? Did anyone else see that? It was like this.
Yeah, Apple's new.
Yeah, that
commercial.
was amazing. That
Yeah.
was such high quality.
And they're doing that all over the place with iPhones. I mean, it's just incredible what you can do now. You know, before
Absolutely.
we didn't even have, like, I remember, like, when I was younger, if you had a camera, you were like somebody. You know, you were mega rich if you were able to have a camera and film. You know, like, no one I knew had cameras. Now everybody has one.
Absolutely, and it's you know, and that's, you know, that's the core vision of the Imagination Agents is really to push technology's limits, you know, and to raise the bar for how we create things, raise the bar for how we deliver things, and really at the end of the day, raise the bar for your experiences with storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, of course, we have these energy platform and some aerospace platforms we've developed, but they're in many ways designed to complement the entertainment story landscape, you know, in some infrastructure type of way.
Yeah.
You know?
If humans moved off Earth, do you see us living in more of a Star Trek kind of environment, or could we actually start forming life on Mars?
You mean colonizing on Mars, or
Yeah, like
Right.
Terraforming.
I think it comes down to a couple of things. I think it comes down to the technologies that we develop next, and kind of going back to, I believe, what you were saying earlier, kind of riffing off that. Every time humanity has a huge push forward, it's a collision of entrepreneurs, people who are willing to risk take, great dedicated minds pushing forward, and then of course the technology that becomes available and what
Right.
those great entrepreneurs and minds do with it. Now I've been fortunate enough to get exposed through different channels, primarily military channels, to some technologies that will will be some kind of blend between colonizing Mars and Star Trek, right?
Okay.
Technologies that are radically advanced beyond space shuttle or things of that sort, and they'll essentially allow for those things to be able to happen easier and more comfortable. I think that's going to be sticker shock what it's going to cost different countries and private industries, but following up on the second founder of the company, Elon Musk, right?
Yep.
He's a guy that is doing some stuff that most investors and other entrepreneurs would have completely warned him against doing. For instance, I'm going to be in aerospace and in the automotive industry. I mean, most people would have been like, "Are you totally out of your mind, dude?" I mean, right? But he's pulled it off, and like they have huge amounts of respect for the fact that he's pulled that off. And I'm going to bet you anything in his R&D departments, he's cross mingling the R&D between the two of them, and so it's going to take more people with the Elon Musk outlook, right? That's like, hey, let's just go. Let's just do it. The time is right. Let's do what humans do next. And that is fix this planet and then go into space, right? And then hopefully, I believe at least within some short order that's meet other people that live on other planets, right?
Yeah.
Other beings and other I just call them all people.
Well,
but
I can only hope that that's what's going to happen, because I don't know how this generation below me, the Generation Z, is going to do with social media. I mean, these are kids who are glued to YouTube all day, every day. But I will say that manufacturing jobs have significantly decreased because machines and robots are going to be taking over. So the entrepreneurial light is only going to start shining brighter. At least that's my hope. And so
right.
I think that you make a great point that if these minds come together, there's no telling what can happen. And statistically speaking, obviously everything's cyclical, it has its ebbs and flows, but
Sure.
if you look at a progression of entrepreneurship and manufacturing, and there's a book called The Lean Startup, which I'm reading right now, which is what I'm referencing this from, but manufacturing is on its way down and entrepreneurship is on its way up in terms of dollars being made. And it's really interesting to see, and I really hope that we can do some amazing things like create Star Trek type worlds or make it to Mars. And
the thought economy, it's brain economy, it's the economy of what you can do with your mind. And for most of our civilization's history, economy was all about, I make a product, you buy my product, right? But a large part of the future with AI and with robotics and things of this sort that will be doing the quote heavy lifting, right? We may very well see multi-billion-dollar companies purely based on the ideas in their brains, right?
Yeah.
And how they get implemented. It's possible.
Well, I mean, it's crazy how far we've come, even with robots. Now they're saying robots have sense of touch and feel and everything else. I mean, I'm starting to feel like maybe iRobot wasn't so far off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just crazy how far we've come, though, with technology. It's almost scary. There's a fine line that you have to stay on, and I really believe that we can get in trouble if we go too far.
Every time every time we have gone through a radical revolution with our technology, we get into a little trouble. Now, if we learn, for instance, obviously the nuclear bomb, right? These were guys like Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer who never set out to make weapons of war. Yet what was made? Weapons of war with their theories and their mathematics. So certainly I do believe there AI and other advanced technologies, robotics, things of this sort. I mean, I know they're already in the warfare landscape, right? So we can get in trouble with it, but then we can also choose to a degree. We can't control the whole world and what they do, but we can also choose to a degree to focus on how we implement it for the betterment, right? For instance, if we did suddenly meet a civilization from another planet, it could certainly unite humans and change their perspectives and say, why are we fighting each other? Why are we doing this again? It could not. I don't know.
It comes down to storytelling.
Yeah,
it comes down to story.
Right? Isn't that what Reagan said, though? He said the only way that we'll unite as a human race is if we're attacked by an outside,
right?
Something like aliens.
Yeah, but that ties into a whole bigger conspiracy. If anyone's seen the documentary Unacknowledged, which is at first, like, we're being pitted against each other. Then we're being pitted against we're coming together as a species to go against the extraterrestrial life, who presumably, according to this documentary, has been monitoring us for a long time, making sure that, and like, that's why we've never been able to shoot a nuke. Come find me, bring me pizza. That's why no one's been able to shoot a nuke up into orbit and back down. Like, all nukes, like you think about the atom bomb, it was dropped from a plane.
Right.
There's what they say is extraterrestrial life monitoring us to make sure that we don't do anything, but they want to pit us against them and make them see as this, like, negative entity.
Right. Well, I'm sure that, if all that's a reality, I'm sure that there are parties and governments and things like that do want that, and then I think there's parties that don't.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any consensus. Let's just call it the Pentagon, right? There's no consensus on that, and the extraterrestrials, if they are this advanced, probably have other technologies that they've not shown us or shared with us, right? If all this is the case, right?
Right.
That might just be like, here, hold on, humans, let me smack you real hard,
Well, yeah, I mean, no one can figure out how they built the pyramids, and it's
Right.
planetary alignment. How did they get those rocks there? You know what I mean?
Where did math
Was
and
it
music come
reverse
from?
Magnetism.
Like,
Yeah.
all this stuff, it's crazy. It's like,
Absolutely.
that's why I'm so fascinated by it, because it's like, how the human mind is so powerful, but to come up with concepts that underlie in humanitarian sciences and arts, it's just like, there's so many similarities. It's crazy to think that a human could come up with that. And then you even, like, to your point, like, look at the Fibonacci sequence and, like, things like
Right.
that, how it applies to the building of the pyramids, and how it applies to natural shapes, like the shell of a snail. And it's just like, how do you draw these correlations with the human mind? I don't know. It comes back to what you were saying. Is it quantum downloads? Is it extraterrestrial downloads? Or is it just, idiot savants who get tight, look at the world in ways that your 9 out of 10 people will never look at?
Right. And it could very well be a mix of all of those things. Who knows, right?
No, facts.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that the more we allow ourselves to explore our minds and to explore our universe and our galaxy and multiple galaxies, and explore the connection to spirituality and all of these things together, if we look at many of these inventors, or like Steve Jobs kind of folks, right? These were entrepreneurs and business persons that looked at those kind of things. They considered, psychology, spirituality, all of these things as part of their journey,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy to not be grounded by just focusing on your business goal or something like that. You know what I mean? And kind of going to what we were talking about maybe you have a great idea. How do you monetize it? How do you take it out into that world? It's about partnerships. It's about, heck, the folks sitting here in this room, we just had a long power session about how each of us has different key specialties in different areas that we specialize, and how to put those together to help ourselves and Earth, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So going back to could Wozniak pull off Apple without Jobs? Nope. Could
No,
Jobs
not a chance.
But see, no one knows who Wozniak is.
Right.
You know what
And
I
he
mean?
may not care either way, but
Right.
You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, he never went out on stage waving, hey, here's the iPhone, like Jobs did.
If you made it this far listening, and you've heard this a couple times now, Steve Wozniak was the guy who actually invented what Steve Jobs turned into Apple's first product. He walked into his house, saw what he was making, and was baffled by what he saw, and figured out how to package everything together and sell it. And that's something else that we talk about often on the podcast, and it's what we've done as a team, is finding those people with complementary skill sets. And you identified Steve Jobs and Elon Musk for a reason, and how they would complement you. And that's another thing, is when you're building these teams as an entrepreneur, as you're looking for holes in the market, be emotionally detached from yourself enough to find your own weaknesses and fill those with traits of co-founders and partners and whatnot.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, absolutely.
Would Michael Jordan be as good as he was without Scottie Pippen? Probably not. You know what I mean?
Right.
What if you gave him
What?
Steph Curry?
I see. Who knows what could have happened? That could
Yeah,
have been
or
amazing.
could Steven Spielberg make a movie if everybody on the set walked out? Nope.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Got to hire movies are a great example of entrepreneurship at scale to accomplish a goal, right? Because there's, if it's a large film, expensive production, there's often many, many people, and they're all specialists in what they do,
Yeah, and you take that video of when that one brash reporter stood up and asked Steve Jobs, well, what the hell do you even do? You don't code, you don't program, what do you do? And he took a breath and he said, some people play instruments and some people play the orchestra. And that's really what it is. Like, he knew how to make all the pieces move together.
And that's another perfect example of why storytelling is fundamentally necessary at each level.
Exactly.
Whether you're talking to investors, whether you're talking to your employees, your team members, your customers, at all times we're story-driven creatures. And by motivating those people through stories, through word, through picture, whatever it is, you're establishing those grounds for better leadership.
Because that's
Absolutely.
what captivates us. That's what draws us in.
As early as the hieroglyphics and what was etched into pyramids. That's storytelling.
Yeah, light bulb
what is
went
all
off.
that if not story?
Yeah, exactly.
The light bulb went off, and that dude who was trying Steve Jobs probably shut the fuck up.
Oh,
He
yeah.
said-
He got real
Oh, yeah.
ended up writing a headline about himself.
Well, Jobs was a master storyteller. I
Yeah.
mean, the guy could tell these stories that could move armies, and Apple by the at that point was big enough to be its own little army.
Yeah.
Could not only that but also move the consumer to spend 3 or 4 times as much money on a computer as they were spending on an alternative computer that ran on, say, Windows at the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, how does he talk you into buying a $3,000 laptop? But he did. He did it with stories.
Without showing you the price. That's
Yeah.
nothing. Still to this day, you don't see prices on Apple's marketing because that's not what they're selling. They're selling an experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what should we expect from you in the next 5 years?
Wow. Well, hopefully
A
lots
lot.
of great progress. Yep. And also great partnerships with folks as well. I think the two platforms that we are currently really focused on, Story 360, which we spoke a little bit about, an entertainment platform both for original content as well as for syndicated and curated content for audiences. And then another platform that I have a big passion for, and it's actually inspired by movie cameras because that's what I understand how they work, right? It's called Solara. And it's a light harvesting platform that uses lenses, much like a magnifying glass over an anthill kind of concept theory like that,
Focusing.
But we
of
don't
light.
want to. We don't want to tell too much on.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
You'll have to stay tuned.
We'll pause on that,
Yeah.
But so I would say expect us to work in the entertainment world and the energy world, as well as with our partners, developing new technologies that can, hopefully make the world a better place, make the earth healthier,
Make the universe a better place.
make the universe a better place. Absolutely. We don't have a crystal ball, but I do believe there's some really amazing technologies that are going to blow away humanity that are in the pipeline. They have been for a while, but now I think that the powers that be are ready to kind of show them off.
Yeah.
And so, we'd love to be involved in that stuff too. I've always been obsessed with space travel, and I've watched all these documentaries on Apollo and stuff like that. I would love to make some type of a contribution to that, even if it's like a user interface for new generation spacecraft, or it's,
Just be part of that team, though.
yeah, or if it's filmmaking to tell the story of it, or something of that effect. But making a contribution, because I strongly believe that, again, clean up this planet, get to some other ones.
What are absolutely, and I'm all aboard with that. I agree, and I know they do too. That's why we're entrepreneurs, right?
Right.
What are 3 quick tips to be a better storyteller?
Well, 3 quick tips to be a better storyteller. Be ritualistic about storytelling. At least this has been true in my life. Whether you feel like it or not, or whether you think the idea is kind of silly at first or not, don't listen to some of those little voices in your head. Get it on paper, or however it is, on your iPhone or your $100,000 camera. Just get it down, right? Get it down. Be willing to be subjective in the storytelling process. I've had many cases where I was kind of in love with a little piece of a story I was working on, and then later down the road, as the story developed, it wasn't as relevant as it was, and I was like, I gotta let that part go, but it's killing me to do that.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, be subjective with how you edit your story. All stories, whether they're books or spiritual text, have also been edited over time. You know, all stories in some point go through some kind of editing process.
Evolution.
Typically, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. You know, we're sitting here live, but we're editing it in our brain as we're
right.
talking to each other. You know, and then the third one, I would say, don't be afraid to embrace different methods and techniques or technologies or whatever that is. Methods, techniques, technologies. Don't be afraid to embrace unfamiliar or new ones in order to see how you might tell your story with that particular piece of gear or whatever it is. You know,
Yeah.
it could be a technique or a method, because you know, every human being, you know, gets stuck in a cycle of repeating what they typically think works all the time, and sometimes like mix it up a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Try something different.
Love it. So be ritualistic, meaning write it down, just get it down. Be subjective, don't be attached to the idea, let it evolve. And 3, don't be scared to try new forms of storytelling, because like the whole theme of this is storytelling's been democratized, whatever the letter is, democratized.
We know what you mean, bro.
You know what I mean, exactly. Awesome, bro. Well, where can people follow you at or get in touch with you?
Absolutely. On Instagram, you'll find me under @the_DJMC. So @THEDJMC. Very easy to remember. The same thing on Twitter @THEDJMC. On Facebook.com/Agent David Joseph. And those are the probably the best places for the moment. I am also, of course, on LinkedIn. You can look up David Joseph and you'll find me.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
That's a pretty hard name to find.
Oh, well, yeah, you know what? If you type in David Joseph, the Imagination Agents,
Perfect.
that's how you'll find it. Yeah,
Perfect.
because I have the company name on there. We will have a public website coming relatively soon. Right now, all of our actual websites are focused directly on business relationships and building our partnerships and things like that. And so we don't, you know, like Matt said a little earlier, we don't want to give away too much too soon, you know, until the timing is right. But, you know, these social media sites, I check them all the time. You're welcome to message me. I check my messages and such. So, you know,
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a great way.
Well,
to
Mr.
find
David Joseph from the Imagination Agents, thank you so much for being on. I think we hit it all.
Thank
We hit
you.
technology, we hit storytelling, we hit space, we hit aliens.
Meta tech.
Yeah, I don't think we missed anything. Everyone who's been listening, thank you guys so much. If you tuned into this whole thing, really appreciate it. We've got some awesome clips that are going to be coming from this. We hit the whole gambit on this one. Y'all know where to follow us, HSTL UP. That's hustle with no vowels, but there is a U and up. At HSTL UP, www.hstlup.com. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Clint.
I'm Matt.
Mr. David
I'm
Joseph.
David Joseph.
Thank
you
again.
guys.
Until next time, guys, hustle up.